Why did war drums echo the moment I arrived when I was supposed to be a bride, not a ghost? That sound wasn't meant for me. It was meant for the man waiting on the porch, the man who thought he'd buried his sins in this canyon and sealed them with silence. But I carried one of those sins with me stitched inside the lining of my dress, folded in the letters he never knew were lies, and etched behind my ribs like a scar I never let heal. I was Maria Calhoun, 19 years old, unmarried, unkissed, unloved, at least not since the day bullets tore my family apart at Deadwood Creek. The man I was riding to meet, Samuel Whitlock, once wore a badge, once swore to protect the innocent. Instead, his mistakes made orphans of girls like me. He didn't know I existed. Not until I wrote him. I used my sister's name, Catherine Morrison. The name of the girl he'd never met, the girl his men gunned down by mistake. I used her handwriting, her gentle words, her hunger for a new life. I fed him fantasies through ink and paper, and Samuel drank them like salvation. He believed I was the woman who'd make him feel whole again. But I wasn't here to heal him. I was here to make him remember. The stagecoach rattled over the final ridge as the canyon opened up, red cliffs rising like ancient witnesses on either side. I felt their judgment. The other passengers were quiet, one asleep, one pretending to be. Only the driver seemed tense. He kept glancing up at the cliffs, and when the first drumbeat rolled down the wind, he swore under his breath. Low, rhythmic, hollow, like bone on leather. War drums, he muttered. I pressed a hand to my stomach, trying to quiet the storm inside. I'd heard those drums once before, 3 years ago. I'd been 12, hiding under a wagon, watching flames lick the walls of our trading post. My father had fallen in front of me, face down in dirt, still clutching his pocket Bible. My brother died screaming. My sister, the real Catherine, bled out beside our mother. All because Sheriff Whitlock had believed the outlaws he was chasing were holed up with us. They weren't. But by the time his posse figured that out, we were already a cautionary tale. The horses slowed as the cabin came into view, isolated, weathered, stubborn against the landscape. And there he stood. Samuel, tall, brooding, rifle in hand. His hair grayer than I imagined, his eyes darker than the ink of the letters he sent. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just watched the horizon like he already knew something was wrong. I stepped down from the coach, my boots crunching against the dust. I expected a greeting, a word, a nod. What I got was silence. And then movement in the trees. A rider emerged not from the trail, but from the ridge. A lone Kiowa brave face, painted in sacred patterns, holding a tall staff wrapped in white cloth, a flag of truce. The driver swore again and backed away from the coach. Samuel raised his rifle but didn't aim. His eyes narrowed. The warrior rode slowly, deliberately, like a man who wanted to be seen. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he dismounted, gaze steady on me. He pulled a folded paper from a pouch at his waist and extended it. "You are not Catherine Morrison," he said. The voice was accented but clear, and it cut through me like glass. I froze. My throat clenched. The lie I had worn for months, pressed against my skin like perfume, suddenly stung. Samuel turned his eyes to me, confusion blooming. "I am called Running Elk," the warrior continued. "We are not here to kill. We are here to make sure he listens, and that you survive what's coming." I took the paper from his hand and unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was Catherine's death certificate. Kansas City, 3 years ago. The last piece of truth it hidden now, laid bare between us. Samuel stared at me now, really looked. Recognition dawning. memory scraping its way to the surface. "My name," I said, forcing the words through my teeth, "is Maria Calhoun. Catherine was my sister." I didn't flinch. "And I didn't come here to be your bride." His face crumbled. His grip loosened on the rifle. The wind shifted, or maybe it was just my heartbeat in my throat, but something between us broke in that moment. "I came here," I said, voice shaking, "but sure, so you'd remember what you did." He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg. But I didn't give him the chance. Because when you wrote those letters, Samuel, when you talked about starting fresh, building a home, dreaming of a woman who would love you, I stepped closer. You were dreaming of the girl you helped put in the ground. The drums started again, low, steady, deliberate. And Samuel Whitlock, once sheriff of Deadwood Creek, once a man who stood above the law, now stood face to face with the ghost he never expected to see again. Me. He didn't speak right away. Samuel just stood there on the porch of that lonely cabin he'd likely built to keep the world out. His rifle hung loose at his side, but his body was stiff like the truth it just handed him had turned him to stone. The death certificate fluttered in the breeze between us. The name on it was Catherine Morrison, my sister. His ghost. "You lied," he said, finally, voice flat, hollow. "So did you," I replied, calm, cruel, cold. But deep down, a part of me wished I'd trembled just a little. Samuel's eyes searched mine. He looked older now, not in years, but in weight, like the canyon itself had been pressing on his shoulders for 3 winters straight. "I didn't know anyone survived," he said. "You didn't care to know." That stopped him, his mouth shut like a door. I stepped forward, the paper still in my hand. "You left us, Samuel, my sister, my father, my brother. You called it a raid, said you were after the Garrett gang. But you never saw them, did you?" He said nothing. "I was 12, I whispered. "I remember your voice shouting orders. I remember the crack of your rifle. I remember my sister dying over me while your men kept firing. That was the last time I saw a blue sky without blood in it." His jaw clenched. "I thought we were under attack," he murmured, almost pleading. I held his gaze. "You were." He blinked. "By your own mistakes." Something broke in him then, not loudly, not with a cry. Just a sag in the shoulders, a slump on the porch railing, like a house beam collapsing in silence. The rifle clattered to the floorboards. "I've lived with it every day," he said. "That moment, that sound, that smell." I tried to forget, but the wind brings it back. Every time, it shifts. I knelt beside him. Not out of pity, but because this next part required something like stillness. "I didn't come here to punish you," I said. "Not exactly." He looked up, startled. Then why I reached into my satchel and handed him the warrant, brittle yellowed around the edges but still stamped by the territory. He unfolded it. Recognition bloomed in his face like slow poison. "The Garrett gang," he said. Yes, I nodded. Still alive. Still robbing, killing. 14 more people dead since Deadwood Creek, and they're planning something worse. I pulled out the telegram. His hand trembled when he took it. He read slowly. "Children's Train Millfield, stop, 43. Orphans, no escort next week targeted by Garrett gang." His lips moved, but no sound came. Finally, he looked at me, haunted. 43 children, he whispered, all heading west for families who don't know what's coming. His hands tightened around the paper. "You came here for revenge." he said, voice low. And now, you want me to save a train full of children? No, I said softly. I want you to choose what kind of man you're going to be when you die. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You don't deserve redemption, I added, but those kids deserve a chance at life. You can't change what you did to us, but you can change what happens next. Running Elk stepped forward from the shadows then, calm, silent, dignified. The Garretts took my nephew 2 winters ago, he said quietly. We found his body in the creek frozen with a bullet in his chest. No name, no prayer, just a ragged coat and a broken jaw. We buried him without words. But the wind still speaks his name. Samuel stared at him, the weight of those 2 testimonies, mine and Running Elk's, pressing down like scripture. You're surrounded, I added. 400 warriors, not one of them here to kill. But they will not let you run. Not this time. He nodded slowly, then stood, his voice cracked. I buried my badge in a coffee tin. Told myself I'd thrown it away. I didn't. I held out my hand. Then dig it up. Pin it on. You're not the sheriff they need. But maybe for one last ride, you can be the man who does what's right. He disappeared into the cabin for a moment. When he came out, he held the tin like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He opened it, pulled out the badge. It gleamed, dulled by dust, but not by memory. He stared at it, then slowly pinned it to his shirt. Ill ride. Running Elk gave one nod. We leave at moonrise. If we ride hard, we can reach Millfield before they do. Samuel turned toward me. What will you do when this is over? I haven't decided, I said. Then I met his eyes and saw for the first time not the man who killed my sister, but the one who might save someone else's. But I know this, I added. You get one shot at Honor Samuel. Don't miss it again. He took a deep breath, looked at the canyon rim, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the wind didn't feel like it was carrying ghosts. It felt like it was clearing the way. Mama once told me that when the land moans beneath your feet, it's not the earth shifting, it's the truth clawing its way to the surface. The night Samuel unearthed his past, something inside all of us cracked. He didn't say much after he pulled that badge from the tin, just held it like it burned. I didn't need words. His silence said more than confessions ever could. We buried the badge back beneath the cottonwood roots the next morning. Not because he was hiding, but because he was finally willing to let go. That's when the rumors started to creep in like smoke from a brush fire. Riders had been spotted near Painted Hollow, strangers with silver buttons and union-issued boots. They weren't settlers. They weren't welcome. And they weren't just passing through. They're lawless, not lawmen, Running Elk said after a quiet ride back from the southern ridge. But they carry papers stamped with your governor's seal. The system has changed its face, but not its hunger. That night, under the flickering lanterns of our cabin porch, we held council, Samuel, Running Elk, me, and a few trusted townsfolk, Mr. Halbrook from the mill, old Elsie from the chapel, even Clay Mathers, the blacksmith's son, who once swore he'd never listen to a half-breed or an ex-lawman. Turns out, fear humbles pride quicker than truth ever could. What do they want? I asked. Samuel finally spoke. The railroad is coming, and so is the claim office. Painted Hollow's been marked iron oil and something else. Something sacred. Running Elk met my gaze. Caves? Burial grounds. Stories your people forgot, but mine remember. I clenched my fists. So they'll take it. Like always. Samuel shook his head. Not if we claim it first. We all stared at him. You want to fight the federal agents? Halbrook said. No, Samuel said. I want to beat them at their own game. The next few days felt like racing a dust storm, never knowing which way it would shift. Samuel rode out to the old land office in Copper Ridge. Somehow he returned with papers legally binding, notarized and signed. How, I asked. He smirked, holding up the badge again. Sometimes the system forgets its ghosts. It wasn't justice. Not exactly. But it bought us time. We filed the claims every inch of land we could surrounding Painted Hollow like a barrier of ink and law. Running Elk mapped the sacred sites in a way only he understood, symbol over survey. Meanwhile, the townsfolk quietly aligned one by one. Even Clay Mathers handed over half his father's pasture, and just when we thought we'd pulled ahead of the storm changed its name. Marshal Ethan Grady rode into town wearing a grin carved from marble and a coat lined with contracts. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave a gun. He didn't need to. "Lovely land y'all got here," he said at the saloon, tapping a map. "Shame if it were relocated." He turned to me with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Miss Maria, isn't it? Heard you're quite the visionary." I stared him down, heart thudding in my chest. "We're not selling." He shrugged. "Everyone sells, darlin'. Eventually. Whether it's for money, mercy, or men." He tipped his hat and left. I could still smell his cologne in the air, something sweet masking something rotten. That night, I sat beside Samuel under the stars. He looked tired, older, but his eyes burned. "He's not bluffing," Samuel said. "Grady used to run with the border rangers. Men like him don't negotiate. They infiltrate." "So what do?" I asked. "We expose him." And that's when he told me what no one else knew. Ethan Grady wasn't a marshal. Not anymore. He'd been stripped of his badge 2 years ago for extortion, fraud, and abuse of authority. But he'd kept the coat, the look, the charme, the accomplices. I remembered the tremble in Elsie's voice when she spoke of him. The way Clay avoided his gaze. The way some of the ranchers kept quiet, not from fear, but complicity. "You think they're working with him?" I asked. Samuel didn't answer. He didn't have to. We had the land. We had the claim. But we were standing on a fault line, and it was only a matter of time before the quake hit. And 2 wasn't ready to love yet. But I was ready to fight. They burned the prayer tree that night. I saw it from my window, the flames licking high into the sky. Embers like red stars carried by the wind toward the canyon. The tree had stood for generations on the ridge above town, its twisted limbs hung with feathers, beads, and strands of hair from the people who had lived here long before we came. Running Elk said his grandfather's father had planted it. He said it was the heartroot of the land. Now it was ash. I should have wept, but my tears had run dry. I watched the blaze reflect in the mirror glass of the saloon window, where Marshal Grady raised a glass with the town council, like they'd signed away a soul. "He's making his move," Samuel said quietly from behind me. He wanted to split the town, break the old ties before the hearing. "It's a warning." "No," I replied, voice cold as the empty air between us. "It's a challenge." The next morning, we buried what remained. Running Elk, dressed in full ceremonial hide, walked ahead of us carrying the charred roots in a clay bowl. Behind him came the women of the tribe, silent, veiled in dust and mourning. I walked beside them, barefoot, holding the deed to my father's land in one hand and a strip of red cloth in the other. This cloth, Running Elk said in the old tongue, was once tied to the limb of the tree. Now it will be tied to the heart of a promise. He looked at me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. He dipped the cloth into the ash, then bound it around my wrist. With that act, I stopped being just my father's daughter. I became something more, a keeper of the land, a vessel for the memory of a people nearly erased. By dusk, the hearing began. The courthouse was packed. Grady stood with his arms folded, backed by a lawyer from St. Louis, a man with slicked hair and a tongue like oil. The townsfolk filled the pews, faces tight and unreadable. I saw Elsie clutching her apron. Clay sat with his hat in his lap, eyes lowered. Then there was Samuel standing by me, clean-shaven, wearing the old badge again. The judge was an old man, brittle but clear-eyed. "You're contesting the grant?" he asked. "I am," I said, stepping forward, "because the land wasn't vacant. It was sacred." "Objection," Grady's lawyer snapped. "This isn't about superstition, it's about property lines and registered deeds." Samuel stepped in. "Your Honor, this document that held up the folded papers proves that in 1864, a claim was filed under my name for the Whitlow territory. That land includes the disputed parcel." The lawyer scoffed. "He abandoned his claim. He was disgraced." "I was silenced," Samuel said, voice low but firm. "I wore this badge while rail barons bought off courts and erased men like me. But I never relinquished the title. It still holds." Grady leaned forward, smiling. "So, this is your big return, Marshall, riding in on guilt and dust." "No," I said, stepping beside him. "He's not riding in. He's rising up, and we all are." I turned to the townsfolk. "You remember what this land was? Before maps carved it into fences. Before men like him bought it with ink instead of sweat. My father died defending it. The tree that once blessed this town is now ash. And still we remember. We endure." The room was silent. Then Clay stood. He didn't say anything. He simply walked to our side. Then Elsie. Then two ranchers I didn't know. One by one, the pews began to empty, not in anger, but in quiet solidarity. A silent rebellion. The kind that doesn't need gunfire to be heard. The judge raised a hand. "I've heard enough. A ruling will be made at dawn. Until then, keep your tempers and your tongues." As we walked out, the sky above Painted Hollow turned red, and in the last light of that day, I felt it again. Not fear, but faith. The kind that can only grow from ash. They brought Grady out at dusk. He was no longer the towering man who'd loomed over my childhood like a storm. His shirt hung loose on him, his hands shook slightly, and his eyes darted like a coyote's caught in daylight. But even now, even with his sins dragging behind him like a broken plow, he tried to stand tall. I stood across from him. The town gathered around us, silent but not passive. Flynn held the old ledger-torn Smoky and damning. Clara May leaned against the hitching post with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a stare like a judge's gavel. Behind me, Running Elk stood by the prayer trees, ashes unmoved, but unmistakably present. Grady's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "So this is justice now. Dirt and dancing ghosts." I stepped forward, holding out the document, Mama's death certificate altered by his own hand. "No, Grady. This is memory. And memory doesn't fade just because you bury it under deeds and fences." His eyes flicked to the paper and then to Flynn. "You gonna let her preach, lawman?" Flynn said nothing. He dropped the ledger at Grady's feet. The pages splayed open like wings witnesses no church could deny. I looked at him, then truly looked. The ache in me, the ache, to be loved, to be seen, to belong, Syl, trembled somewhere beneath my ribs. But it no longer ruled me, and for the first time I asked myself, would Mama want me to be his executioner or his witness? I chose witness. I handed the certificate to Clara May. "Brand him," I said softly. Without hesitation, she soaked a cloth in whiskey, lit a match from her boot heel, and pressed it against the old wound on his shoulder. The sound was sickening, a hiss, a grunt, A moment of near silence, and then Grady's knees hit the dirt. "Say it," she ordered. He groaned. "Say what?" "The truth I said. Say what you did. To her. To the land. To all of us." Grady's eyes darted to the crowd. No one moved. No one saved him. "I forged the claim," he spat, then muttered. "Took the deed. Told the men to burn her out if she wouldn't leave." "And the fire?" I asked. He hesitated, the wind catching his breath. "I didn't light it, but I didn't stop it either." There it was. The silence that followed felt like something holy. Like grief and thunder rolled into one. Running Elk stepped forward, placed a hand on my shoulder, and spoke in the old tongue. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the weight of them. When he turned to Grady, he uttered just one word, "Shun." It wasn't a hanging. It wasn't revenge. But it was exile. By dawn, Grady was gone. No one spoke of where he went or what trail he followed. He just vanished like smoke from a prayer fire. Flynn returned the deed to me 3 days later. Not just ours, but the entire ridge Mama fought for. He handed it over with a single sentence. "It's yours now, but don't let it own you." And I didn't. We built again slowly this time, and with fewer illusions. The courthouse was never rebuilt. Instead, justice was spoken beneath the branches of the new prayer tree we planted in the charred earth. Town meetings, weddings, even births, they all happened there under the canopy of shared memory. Clara May started teaching the children how to read the sky, the soil, and the silence between two heartbeats. Flynn never wore his badge again, but people still called him sheriff when they needed order. As for me, I stayed. I didn't ride out in search of the love I'd once ached for. I realized that love wasn't something distant or dramatic. It was built hand by hand, voice by voice. In Clara's laughter, in Flynn's quiet, in the way the wind carried Mama's lullaby through the tall grass some nights. Sometimes I sit by the new prayer tree and run my fingers through the soil. It's softer now. Not because it forgot the blood spilled into it, but because it remembers. Love can live in that kind of remembering. And when I hear the wind shifting through the sagebrush, I whisper back, "I'm here, Mama. I'm home." In the dust and fire of the frontier, what endured wasn't just land or law, but truth, even when it came late. This story, across 5 chapters, reminds us that justice is not always swift, but it is relentless. That love, real love, does not look like longing or romantic fantasy, but like sacrifice, honesty, and standing up when silence would be safer. Grady's fall wasn't just the undoing of a man, but the fall of a system built on silence and greed. And Clara May Flynn, and even the townsfolk's complicit or passive found redemption, not by being perfect, but by finally doing right. In today's world, we may not stand in ash circles or raise rifles at sundown, but we still face moral crossroads. We still choose between silence and truth, comfort and courage, self-preservation and legacy. This story urges us to ask, what wounds have we ignored? What truths have we buried? And who might be waiting for us to speak up? Because healing, whether in a town, a family, or a soul, always begins when someone dares to stand in the circle and say, "Enough." You've just heard one powerful story, but many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.